directions, I guess you would say. Verses 8 through 19 here, contributions to support the priests. And we've talked about this. We've had the charts. You know, the Israelites are camped around the tabernacle, and between the Israelites and the tabernacle is where the Levites would camp. I don't remember all the directions and all that, but they didn't receive a land inheritance. Of course, they're not in the promised land yet, but this is how they were supported. The heave offerings were offered by the Israelites. And remember, the heave offering that's actually talking about the motion. Whatever they would bring, they would lift some of it up to God and bring the rest back down. And that was theirs. Well, Israel gave that to God. And here in chapter 18, God says, that's for you. The heave offerings are for you. And from the grain offerings, the sin offerings, the trespass offerings, it all goes to the Levites. And everyone in their family. So you think about how many people, literally hundreds of thousands of people, offering these sacrifices on a daily basis. I don't remember the numbers. But how many thousands upon thousands of Levites were there? This is whatever Israel offered, it was for all of them. And the only people that couldn't partake of those holy things or those offerings were the unclean. And this chapter addresses that. Look at, somebody read chapter 18 and verse 19.
All the heave offerings of the holy things which the children of Israel offer unto the Lord have I given thee and thy sons and thy daughters with thee by a statute forever. It is a covenant of salt forever before the Lord unto thee and to thy seed with thee.
Okay. Other specifics, as I put here, are mentioned in chapter 18, verses 11 through 14. The covenant of salt. It's only mentioned 3 times in the Bible, and I give you those references. But it refers to an agreement or a covenant that was perpetual, that it lasted throughout all of their generations as long as this covenant stood. New parents had to redeem their firstborn by giving 5 shekels of silver to the tabernacle. Of course, those funds went to specific uses for the tabernacle. The same was true of unclean animals. Of course, the clean were used for sacrifice. Firstborn of animals for sacrifice were offered. And the reason the priesthood was given these gifts. Look at chapter 18, verse 20. The Lord spoke unto Aaron, Thou shalt have no inheritance in their land, talking about the promised land. Neither shalt thou have any part among them. I am thy part, and thine inheritance among the children of Israel. So that's why all the sacrifices were given, or all of these parts of these sacrifices were given to the Levites. In the sense that Christians are a preserving and influential impact in the world. Kind of, sort of, maybe. But this was an agreement that was just perpetual, specifically for the Levites. Okay, chapter 18, verses 21 to 32. Tithes given to the Levites. The Levites were then to tithe from what they were given. They were given the tithes, and they were to tithe from the tithes. 10%. And then they received what was left of that, of course. Tithing is something... Well, let me do something here real quick. I'll do a quick search. It's not mentioned but a couple of times. So the word tithe itself is used 16 times. The word tithes, plural, is used 20 times. But I'm thinking in terms of the New Testament. You read tithes in Luke 18. Of course, Luke 18 is the 2 men that went into the temple to pray. This is the hypocrite. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. Hebrews 7, that's where it's mentioned 4 times, is when Abraham gave a tenth to Melchizedek, as recorded in Genesis chapter 14. So that word is not a frequently used term in the Bible, 36 times. But a big deal is made out of it in the religious world today. A lot of churches teach that you're supposed to tithe, give 10%. But there's no minimum and there's no maximum required in the New Testament. All of our offerings are free will offerings. And all you have to do to know that is read a couple of passages. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. You give as what? As you prospered. Okay? And then 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and I think it's specifically verse 5. First of all, they gave of themselves to the Lord, and then to us. But it was free will. Somebody turn over to 2 Corinthians 9, please, and read verses 6 and 7. 2 Corinthians 9, 6 and 7. Okay, so a couple of definitions here. Give as he purposes in his heart. The word purpose there means to put one thing before another. In other words, what you contribute to the church each week is something that you've planned ahead of time. And 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2 says the same thing. Not grudgingly, literally not out of sorrow. Here comes Steve with the basket again. Okay, just keep your money. Don't give out of sorrow and out of necessity. You do it because you have to. No part of worship should be, well, it's Sunday, I guess I have to. It's about how you offer. Well, we think of like the widow's two mites. She gave out of her poverty, but she ended up giving more than all the rich who gave a little bit of what they had. It has nothing to do with quantity. It's how you give. So I mentioned 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 5 earlier. Not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord, and then to us by the will of God. When you're dedicated to doing God's will yourself, contributing to the church is not a problem. It's not going to be an issue. So, anyway, tithing is not a part of the New Testament. If you want to give 10%, okay, that's fine. If you can't give 10%, and that's the thing, everybody's different. Every situation is different. You give as you've been prospered, and you give as you've purposed. Not grudgingly, not a necessity, cheerfully. You also give of yourself, yeah? Is that what you said? Yeah. There's a lot that can be given to the church, not just money, time and effort and things like that. Yeah, absolutely. But you can't substitute that for giving financially. Yeah. You can't say, well, I came up to the building and talked to Barry for 10 minutes, so I'm not giving this week. You might want to give more so you can find a new preacher. I don't know. All right. Anything else on chapter 18 and the support of the priesthood? I do want to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9 real quick. So if you don't have anything else, let's jump over there. 1 Corinthians chapter 9 this time. Paul uses this very chapter, Numbers, to talk about something that was going on in Corinth. He refused to take money from Corinth. When he came to Corinth, he met Aquila and Priscilla, Acts 18, 1 through 3, who by trade were tent makers, and so he was what we would call today a bivocational preacher. He preached, but he also had a secular job. And it's not that they should not have paid him or could not have paid him. He refused it because there were people in Corinth who were challenging his apostleship, and his fear was, if they see me taking funds from Corinth, they'll use that against me too, and it's going to hinder my preaching of the gospel there. So, somebody read 1 Corinthians 9. And do verses 10 and 11, please. All right, the key there is verse 11. If we've sown unto you spiritual things, I've taught the gospel here. Is it a great thing that we reap material things? In fact, look at verse 13. Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple, and those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings of the temple? Even so, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live of the gospel. So, it's interesting to see the connection that Paul makes with these laws, and he would know them being having come up as a Pharisee, to his right as a located preacher, if you want to use that word, to be supported financially. All right, anything else before we move to chapter 19? Okay, chapter 19, the red heifer and cleansing. Let me ask you this question first. Have any of you heard on any podcasts or on the news about Israel and a red heifer? Sarah, I know you have. Anybody else? Nobody else. Where are you people living? It's not really that big a news unless you kind of have to know where to look and listen. There is an effort to, I guess you would say, reenact this process of offering a red heifer and start building the third temple in Jerusalem. Do you know what's going to happen if a bunch of Jewish people go into Jerusalem and attempt to build a temple? I don't know that I'd call it World War III, but it wouldn't be far from it. Anyway, that's going on. You can Google that on your own time. The red heifer, verses 1 through 10. And this is about cleansing. This is about cleansing sin. And this very process is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 9, and it's contrasted with the sacrifice and offering of Christ. So the red heifer is to be slaughtered, and then some of its blood is to be sprinkled, but they're to take the whole thing, and they're to burn it with hyssop, cedar wood, and some scarlet yarn. And then they're to take the ashes of what's burned and keep it in a clean place. And what they were to do with those ashes was use it to make what's called water of purification, a way to purify those who had been defiled. Are you not happy that we live under the new covenant? That we don't have to get a red heifer and sacrifice it and burn it with these other ingredients and keep those ashes, that when we somehow become defiled, we have to go wash with this water. So let's run over to Hebrews chapter 9 real quick and look at this. The first 10 verses of Hebrews 9 talk about and verse 10 says it, foods, drinks, various washings, and fleshly ordinances imposed until the time of Reformation. The time of Reformation would be the New Covenant age, the age of the church, however you want to say it. So all of that stuff had a purpose, obviously, but it foreshadowed ultimately the coming of Christ and His sacrifice. So you start there in verse 11 of Hebrews 9, Christ is a high priest of good things to come. And just real quick, look at Hebrews 10:1. What does it call the law? The law is a what? A shadow of good things to come. Well, Hebrews 9:11. Christ is the high priest of the good things that are here, that are present. The literal rendering would be the good things that have come. Not made with hands. It's not a physical tabernacle like Israel did. He didn't bring, verse 12, the blood of goats and calves. His own blood. He entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption for us. Okay, so now somebody read verses 13 and 14. Okay, so that right there is what we're reading in Numbers 19. The sprinkling and the ashes of a heifer cleanse the impure person. All right, go ahead.
How much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered Himself without spot to God, cleanse our conscience from dead works to serve the living God?
And look at the next phrase of verse 15. And for this reason He is the mediator of the new covenant. It's a better covenant established upon better promises. He took His own blood, not the blood of an animal, and obtained, as the end of verse 12 says, obtained eternal redemption for us. So, back to Numbers chapter 19. I really don't have a lot to add. It just tells the process in verses 1 through 10. And then in the rest of chapter 19, verses 11 to 22, it talks about purification laws. So that's what this water of purification and the sprinkling of these ashes, this was what they would be for. A person who's contacted a dead body, 19:11 to 13. A man who's died in his tent. How to purify the unclean person, and what to do when people were not purified. So again, it's just laws that obviously don't apply to us. But if you're ever reading Hebrews chapter 9, now you know where to, if you want to read about it, let's go to Numbers chapter 19. I don't really know. I really don't know. Well, the heifers, from what I understand, came from America and were sent over there. And I think Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House? He was over there involved in it. See, and I've talked about this before, but America's foreign policy, particularly in regard with Israel, is based on, them becoming an independent state in 1948. And it's all based on the idea, like if you saw the interview that Ted Cruz did with Tucker Carlson, and Carlson was pressing him on this issue, why are we supporting Israel as a nation? Why? And Ted Cruz, vaguely referenced a psalm that says, "He who blesses Israel will be blessed." That's the idea of America's close ties with Israel, essentially. I mean, there's more to it than that, but that's the root of it is what the Old Testament says about Israel. So there's so many, like you said, rabbit holes that you could go down with that. I chose not to go down them. I just know what's going on to a very limited sense. I don't know. Test run. Yeah, it's got to be perfect. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a very common thought today. A lot of this is tied into the promised land. The promises specifically going all the way back to Abraham. But here's the thing, and we know this, every promise that God made to Israel was fulfilled. Okay, Joshua 21, 43 through 45 says that without any equivocation. Not one thing failed of all the good that God promised to Israel. And then it says it again, all came to pass. There's not any promise left out there dangling anywhere in the Old Testament history that's still yet to be fulfilled for Israel. Do what? Right. Well, and a lot, even in our country's politics, a lot of those who hold that they claim to be Catholic or some form of Christian. So do this real quick. Let's turn over to Romans chapter 9. Romans chapters 9 through 11 addresses this topic specifically in regard to Israel. Paul is an Israelite. He's a Hebrew of the Hebrews, the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, all that stuff. Circumcised the 8th day. Philippians 3 details that. And Romans 9 through 11 is a special unit of Scripture because Paul talks about it to a great extent. if I myself could be accursed, Romans 9:3, from Christ, if it were possible to allow myself to go to hell, I would do that to allow all my Jewish brethren to be saved. But that's not how that works. And so chapters 9 and 10 talk about that God had a chosen people. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. He chose Abraham, and then he chose Isaac, and then he chose Jacob. And it's from that the nation was born. And so they began to think, well, he's our God. He lives in Jerusalem, in the temple. They literally thought that. So chapter 11, has God cast away his people? Absolutely not. God forbid. I'm an Israelite of the seed of Abraham of the tribe of Benjamin. As a nation, God is done with Israel. But as individuals, any person who is of that descent, of Jewish descent, can be saved. And that's Paul's point. But so can the Gentiles. That's what was going on in Rome. The church was made up of, I don't know if I'd say half and half, but the church was split in Rome. And these 3 chapters address that topic specifically, because the Jews were very possessive of their God. And that's why you have Acts 15 in the conference in Jerusalem, because certain brethren came from Judea and were telling people, unless you are circumcised and keep the law of Moses, you cannot be saved. And I said this Sunday night, most of your New Testament addresses that. I mean, from Acts on, addresses that topic. So there are still people today who believe that Israel is God's chosen people, and they are not. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yep. That's right. All right, guys. Appreciate your attention. Do what? Yeah. He's not a respecter.